Prophet, peace be upon him, said Islam began as an estranged thing and it will return as an estranged thing. So glad tidings to the strangers. Sometimes being a Muslim in this time, and depending on where a person lives, can feel very strange, and a person can feel very estranged. And ironically, much of the estrangement or the difficulty for Muslims in this time is brought about by people who claim to be Muslim. And it's one thing to say that there are groups of Muslims or there are problematic things happening in Muslim majority countries, but it's another thing when you've got people doing things explicitly in the name of Islam, often evoking some of the loftier ideas within the Islamic tradition, within the Muslim history, to basically be just committing really horrible crimes. And given this idea that the Prophet, peace and blessings of Allah be upon him, imparted to us and shared with us of him being the greatest sign of the coming of the last hour, of him being, his advent being the kind of biggest indication that the world is nearing an end. Given that, you have to start asking really difficult questions, like what does it mean to be a believer in this time? And I think that one of the things that becomes really, really blatantly clear is the importance of developing a sincere and authentic relationship with the divine that is not predicated on anything happening politically out in the world, but is very much about a realization that I as a creature have an obligation to worship, to know, to love my Creator, and to prepare myself for my meeting with my Creator. And then from there, as you move outward, begin looking really critically at your sphere of concern and your sphere of influence, and to try to be an agent of change. But at the end of the day, holding on to faith. And one of the ways that the Prophet describes being a believer at the end of times is like holding on to a hot coal. It's going to get hard. It's going to be very difficult. The Prophet, peace be upon him, tells us in a rigorously authenticated tradition that there will be strife or discord, a word called fitna in Arabic. There will be strife and discord like pieces of a dark night, continuous, one after another. And in one variant of the narration, he says, a person in that time will come into the morning as a believer, and by the evening they have disbelieved. Then by the morning they will believe, and by the evening they have disbelieved. And the idea, one of the takeaways that we find from scholarly commentary is that faith will be this really fluid, almost violent process where a person will come in and out of faith. Like in the morning they believed, in the evening they've disbelieved. By the morning they believe, in the evening they've disbelieved. That's one of the meanings of it. In other words, that people will literally be on a type of like a cyclical, in and out with faith, which is really scary. And then the other meaning of it is that there will be people who in the morning they don't believe in the divine, and by the evening they've believed in the divine. In a day, that process of change has taken place and they've become a believer, but vice versa. And this is the really scary thing, that a person may awake in the morning a believer, and they're perfectly fine in their faith, and by the evening they've lost faith. But the part here to kind of highlight is that it's the discord. That's the context within which this is happening. In other words, things are so insane you can't make heads from tails. You can't this group fighting that group in the name of this or that. And again, without even mentioning specifics, because you can fill in the blanks. That could be happening at a geopolitical level. It could be happening in your backyard, depending on where you live. And the Prophet, one of the ways he describes the end of times is that there will be prevalent killing. So much so that the person who killed won't know why they're killing, and the victim won't know why they were killed. And I mean, just read what's happening in the news. You think about you think the victims of these different crimes that are taking place, do you really think they knew why they were killed? And do you really think, whatever justification people have for the crimes that they're committing and the killing that they're doing, whether it be political or religious or otherwise, do you really think they know why they're taking another human life? It's totally insane. So what's the good news in bad times? The Prophet, peace be upon him, was asked by a man who comes to him, and he's in the middle of a sermon. And imagine for a moment interrupting an important person giving a public lecture, let alone interrupting a preacher giving a sermon, let alone interrupting a prophet of God in the middle of a sermon and say, O Messenger of Allah, when is the last hour? And the Prophet at one point doesn't respond to him, and eventually he responds to him, and he says, where's the person who asked the question? He came forth and he said, Ma a'datta laha, aw kama qala sallallahu alayhi, what have you done to prepare for the last hour? What have you done to prepare yourself for it? And the man says, O Messenger of Allah, I don't have much prayer, I do not have much fasting, I don't have much charity, but I love Allah and His Messenger. Here one may think that the answer is going to be, well, if you want to prepare for the last hour, you should go pray and fast and do charity, because those are all good things. What does he say? You'll be with the person who you love. You will be with the person who you love. And it's interesting that this conversation is happening within the context of the last hour. What did the Prophet say? And this is some of what challenges some of the unorthodox views of the end of times in terms of Islam. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said that Islam will come apart like a fabric comes apart until it will not be known what prayer or fasting or sacrifice or religious rites are. وَلَا يُسْرَ عَلَى كِتَابِ اللَّهِ فِي لَيْلَةٍ حَتَّى لَا يَبْقَى فِي الْأَرْضِ مِنْهُ آيَةٌ. And the book of Allah, namely the Quran, will be removed in one night until there's not even a single verse of the Quran left in the earth. But there will remain small groups of people, an old woman and an old man, who will say, we found our forefathers on this saying, this word, La ilaha illallah. So we say it. Hudayfa, who's narrating the hadith, is asked by Sila. He says to him, Ya Hudayfa, how is La ilaha illallah going to benefit them anything? And they don't know what prayer is, or what fasting is, or what hajj is, or what religious rites are, etc. And every time Sila would ask Hudayfa, he turned away from him. Then on the third time Hudayfa looked at him, he said, Ya Sila, this word La ilaha illallah, it'll save them from the hellfire. Tunjihim min an-nar. In other words, they may not have anything but La ilaha illallah. They may not have any prayer, might not have any fasting, but the word La ilaha illallah will save them from ultimate damnation.